Hello and welcome to the Delirium engine, where we dismantle a series of rules and talk about Dungeons & Dragons in a way that we believe is interesting, but likely actually isn't. And once again, I've gone ahead and done about 30 seconds of black screen before I've faded into the actual show. With me today, I have Mr. Dagwood.
Hello.
And we will be talking once again about the rules for successful players. We are almost done. I think we are on rule 5 or 6. I'll have to take a quick look. Let me see if I've got my piece of paper. It's just over there. I will go catch it. And in the background again is a little bit more of our beautiful Amiga classics. So I found on YouTube. I will link the stunning Amiga classics background music in the description, if that matters to anybody.
What is that actually?
There are a series of Amiga games and I don't know which ones. And I can show you the list, but it doesn't play on OBS Studio.
Oh, right on.
So, we are on rule 5 of 7.
Cool beans.
Yeah, interesting. Also, interesting note, I don't have the actual channel name and I don't think the video's up, but for people who are interested in watching something that's probably much more interesting, much more popular, and with some might say a cooler guy, Swampy has already started a podcast and he did one yesterday and has already been stricken off of YouTube. So
Great.
He got 50 views in like the first 20 minutes. Probably because he put some really goofy tags in, and they immediately cut off his video before I was even able to see it or click on it. It just said this video had been removed. So there's a lot of swearing, and the show is called What Would You Like With Your Coffee, which is very difficult to search for because there's a lot of coffee-related things. With that said, let's jump into it.
How do you like your coffee? That's
the name of his show,
yeah.
With that said, he did it with the Barbarian yesterday. It was just a one-on-one talking about random junk. Today we will be discussing Rule 5. Players are proactive and need to account. GMs are reactive and need to reason. So this one touches into the idea that GMs are also players, but it gets into the idea of what the rules are for players and more acutely, what the purpose of the character sheet is, or why players need character sheets. Okay? So, as we always do, I'll jump in and sort of explain the rule in detail, and then we'll have Mr. Dagwood comment about it, and then maybe we'll see if we can attack this rule if it's in fact a hug box, which it may or may not be. So, I'll just explain it because this one's a bit vague. So this one has two lines with two sort of points in each line. Players being the players of the game, not the GM, and the GM, which is obviously the game master. Players are proactive. What this means is they need to foresee the future. They need to prepare for things that may yet come. Whether they come or not, who knows? But they have to keep themselves ready for things that will happen. And in that respect, they need to, on their character sheets, account for everything they have and or do. Or will be able to do. So if players have special powers, it needs to be accounted for. If players have access to material or wealth or whatever, it needs to be accounted for. If they have specific items on their person, it needs to be accounted for. In this way, players have to be proactive. You can't be having players retconning all the time and saying, oh no, well, can we just, or can we just say we had this, or I have this, and so on, etc., etc., etc. Because the game will fall apart as a game and just become some weird retcon-topia. The second line is about GMs. Conversely, GMs have to react to everything. So GMs cannot be expected to write character sheets for every Goblin Scout everywhere on the entire planet, and what exactly they may or may not be carrying. So GMs have to react to the situation in front of them and sort of think about what is kind of the best scenario, or what is reasonable for the scenario to have. For example, let's say the Goblin Scout thing, right? Like, players defeat a Goblin Scout. well, what was the Goblin Scout wearing? Well, he had a bow, he had like some goblin leather armor, and maybe the GM's like, well, I haven't given them any, they haven't gotten lucky in a while. This Goblin Scout's got a couple extra gold on him that he hid in his boot. Whatever. So the GM didn't have to write that stuff down. Sometimes they do, but they don't have to. And in fact, it works best if they can just sort of wing it and just sort of work within what is the most reasonable outcome, or what's the most reasonable in a situation. This also helps for players asking questions that the GM didn't think of when they're when they're sort of riffing, when they're just like free forming a dungeon. The player might be like, is there a chandelier? And the GM might not have expressly said there is, but make a note, go, oh yes, there is a chandelier, absolutely, there's one up there, I forgot to mention it. Good looking. You didn't notice it before, but yes, there's a small chandelier, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And this is a way to help the PCs, usually with an element of chance, come up with solutions that the kind of solutions they're looking for. Because you don't always have to say no just because you didn't write it in advance. You just might not have thought about that being there. It might make sense to be there. But if they ask if out in the open in the forest if there's a chandelier, you go, no, there's no chandelier, and in that way you be reactive, right? Unless for some reason there is a chandelier, and that's really strange. Hey, that's a story on its own. But yeah. So just to sum her up after that little rant. Players have to take account of everything, and they are not allowed to retcon, otherwise the game kind of falls apart. And we might actually want to explore that a little bit further in the program. And GMs basically probably shouldn't be writing everything down, maybe a little bit, just to keep them on track, or so they don't have to do any work, like do some pre-work, but don't have to get into the minutiae, because it works better for them if they don't. Yeah. So, Mr. Dagwood, what do you think? Is Rule 5 sound?
First off, I'd actually like to touch on my personal pet peeve. Players not tracking their ammunition. You got 20 arrows, keep track of them. Jesus. But, no, as far as this goes, unfortunately, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's very important for players to be proactive, both in taking responsibility for their character's actions, but even planning ahead, even driving the story, even if they have problems in or out of the game that they need to talk about, being able to ask a question when it's a good time to, finding ways to actually, let's say they've got a goal, to actually work towards that goal, and to come up with ideas are all very good things. I think not only does the retcon not work too well, but and can disrupt the game, but I think it ruins it a little bit, because the whole point about having a character sheet is that your character is a solid thing in the world. They're not like these NPCs where, they come and go, they change names. Maybe there's a different butcher this year, something like that. The adventures, they might go from town to town, so they might not even see the same people again. Having a character sheet is meant to keep track of this, and if you're not going to keep track of it, why do you even have the sheet? It just seems a little counterproductive at that point. As far as GMs needing to be reactive, I think that's absolutely true. It's important to improvise. But in addition, feeding off of your players. Knowing that when they have good ideas, or if they're paranoid, sometimes playing off of their paranoia is the best thing that you can ever do. Say, what if it's this? Oh man, that's great, let's do that. I think this blends in a bit with your rules about GMing, where you don't want to necessarily have this big storyline written out in your head and everything being railroaded, that at the end of the day, I think we figured out that it's best if the players are the ones driving the story. And so being able to use whatever they come up with it, and being receptive to what they seem to be wanting to do, especially for less vocal players, I think is very important. As far as needing a reason, that is the best thing, because at the end of the day, it's a simulation game, it's role-playing, and if people are like, well, why does this goblin have a key? And you say, in his boot, and you turn around and say, well, figure it out, and they go and they track and they find, maybe there's a dead guardsman. You know, so this guy stole the key, and okay, well, where'd this guy come from? You could have this whole world come up from just one silly little random thing, and it's important because it helps the players to avoid metagaming as well. When you have things like the lever to turn off the swinging scythe trap is on the other, you know, they go, okay, well, there should be a lever on the, because there's got to be some way to turn off the trap, right? Well, that makes sense. That's good reasoning. But it's not necessarily up to your players to come up with that. If you yourself do things and then you have good reasons for them, it helps your players believe a little bit more. It makes it easy for them to get into character and to act like these things are actually connected, even if you're just making it up on the spot. Even if you're just saying, well, they happen to be looking for, you know, a guy who escaped from a jail cell. You know, so finding this key, you know, can lead to that. Then sure, you know, you're just crossing the streams, blending stories together, whatever it takes to, you know, give the appearance of, oh, I've planned it this way all along. But that only works if you've got that two-way street, and I think ultimately this is a bit of respect for each other's roles as players and as GMs. And yeah, I've been both. I find that it's very true and very important for them to feed off of each other properly, and also understand where these considerations need to be made. Like, that it is more convenient for the DM to have your stuff written down properly, and that it is better for your players if you have a reason for why you're changing something in the story or bringing something in. After all, the whole idea is that this is a world being explored in some way, and that's basically my 2 cents on it.
All right, I just let you sort of riff off yourself there for a bit, and you kind of went all over the place, but that's all right, and that's good. So I guess that begs the question then, though, is how much should a GM prepare? I guess we'll attack the second line first, just because we'll talk a little bit about GMs. How much should the GMs prepare, and how much should they riff off the players? Like, what are we talking about here? What do you think? Actually, considering you just riffed, I'll let you think about that, and I'll give you my 2 cents. So, the GM, I think, should probably only prepare things that are time-consuming to prepare. For example, the stats of a creature that they know they want to, like, that's going to be in the game next session. Like, the players are going to be doing this. This is like something that's unique, and they got to do it. They can't just write that up on the fly. That's not possible. Stats for magical gear or important artifacts, that's got to write up on that has to be written up in advance. Intricate non-player characters that have like interconnections in the world, I would say should probably be written up beforehand, because at least when I write up NPCs, I generally have I sort of think about it. It's like, okay, well, Betty's in the world. Like, Betty Wright, we'll call her. Betty Wright's in the world. Well, who is Betty Wright? Well, Betty Wright's a baker. Well, what's her motivation for being a baker? Oh, well, she inherited the bakery. So these things they slowly riff off themselves, and you go about that. And like, yeah, you can produce these on the fly, and I often do. But having it ready-made, it keeps the game apace, especially in situations where you want the game to be apace. So if players are just like randomly saying, "Oh, is there a magic store in town?" and that happens all the time, right? And you're just like, "Well, I can, make a die roll. Sure, yeah, okay, whatever. There's a magic place in town. It's run by Morty. Morty's makes potions, but he only makes potions for growing plants, or something like that. Like that's just something you make up on the fly, and it works. And you can, as the players interact, you can sort of riff off of these characters. But I think you'll find yourself, if you do this too often, you'll find yourself falling into tropes. So like all your NPCs will be curmudgeon-y old men, all your women will be like happy-go-lucky women, all your goblins will be, screechy, like kind of whatever inquisitive goblins. Like the ability to prepare ahead of time is a way for the GM to sort of get out of their sort of comfort tropes and explore different NPCs. Yeah. What about you? How do you prepare? How much do you prepare? What do you prepare when you run a game?
I find that I don't prepare that much, to be honest. Especially as experience goes, it's been less and less, but it's still a significant amount. I definitely prepare if I think there's going to be there's a combat that I think is inevitable, or I really want to stick in there. And actually, on that note, I want to say that it's a little bit of a callback, but I guess that's one way to put it, is that you don't want to railroad your story, but it's totally fine to shoehorn elements into it, especially if you can find a reason to stick it in a timely fashion.
Yeah, it's just placing roadblocks, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, oh no, that roadblock's here. It's like, yeah, but you had it over there. Yeah, I moved it.
So I'll do combats. I tend to... a lot of my prep time is actually spent either thinking about repercussions of the player's actions. I like to do the overtime, what has happened thanks to what you've done. It allows me to build those shadowy villains, that antagonist or problem or villain that, isn't in the story yet, but those hints, can come along the way. But I find that I spend more time actually preparing, I suppose I would just call them DM aids, things like list of NPCs, and then I'll come up with a name and a short description, and then when they're used, I'll check them off. It's Betty Wright, she's working at the bakery, check, done. But if the dice had rolled differently, or I picked a different name, it could have gone a totally different way. Things like weather rules, those are things that I've done, but I don't come up with a whole lot of story time. I don't do a whole lot of NPCs fully fleshed out in advance unless they're going to be I know for a fact recurring. So in the end, at best I could say I prepare as much as I think I need to, which is maybe about 30% of what happens in an actual session.
That's fair. Okay.
And again, I'm also not afraid to completely throw it out if I need to. Sometimes players do that.
That's fair. So, players being proactive and needing to account. So, how much are they supposed to be accounting? Everything? Do you think we should account for just a little bit? Just your basic equipment? How much can we take for granted, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a rough one, because I do allow my players a few leniences with things like, if they're trying to remember an NPC's name and I happen to remember what it is, sometimes I'll let them have an int check for it or something like that. I prefer if people can actually either write it down or know it themselves, but I don't mind giving a few freebies here and there. So, especially if it's something like, if somebody said that they were going to the store and then let's say we forgot to actually handle that part, and then they're journeying and they're like, oh, because I went to the store, I'd be like, okay. That's really just cleaning up my mistakes as a GM, not really.
I'll quickly interject for this memories idea. Do you think that players really need to account for the things that the character remembers? I understand that, I often will take notes and write that. But if I don't remember the name of a character, I think it's very reasonable to request the character make a check for it. But if that character is very important, there shouldn't be a check.
Don't leave things up to
the character wouldn't forget that. But sometimes you play these games once every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. How am I supposed to remember as a player the character names of all of these randoms? I think Gagora alone has 12 entries for NPCs that are just randomly named. And that's the game that I'm running with you. And a lot of those you just riffed off the top of your head. You don't even remember half the characters' names.
No.
And
It's because they never appear again, right?
well,
Sometimes they do.
they will. Because I don't take them down unless I'm going to use them for something. But
personally, that actually keeps some of the record-keeping burden off of me as a DM as well.
yeah, but I shouldn't, as a player, be required to do that. Like, I personally do,
No.
but players shouldn't have to take these notes, like, all the time. Like, their character should remember these things. The GM is the one who's built these characters. They're the ones who should probably be keeping track of the things that they said. Now, if they forget, yeah, I understand. You could just give them a new name and not worry about it. And you know, sometimes...
But there should be continuity.
Yeah. But I wouldn't expect players to have to remember shit like that. Like, that's just... It's because it breaks through the fourth wall, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you as the player, you know, have a real life to contend with and names of their own to remember. You know, you don't need to remember everything in the fantasy world. Now, the character would probably remember most of these names, especially the ones that they find very useful. So there's no point doing that.
I think if a player said something like, "No, you remember the halfling woman at the bakery 2 towns back," and you go, I wouldn't make them roll for that. If they remembered something, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I just wouldn't want it to be, how do I put it? I wouldn't want them to put no effort at all into actually remembering these things. Because it's role-playing, right?
Yeah, that's fair too. Like,
But yeah,
it is somewhat
shouldn't be
infuriating
essential.
when players don't know what the heck is going on. Like, they don't know the names of the characters, they don't know anything. Like, it could be just a result of the fact that everyone has real lives and they only play once a month or something like that. But it is nice for players to actually have a remembering of the characters, and maybe that's something that they should take into account, at least for things that are important. But I don't think they should be taken to task for it. Maybe a good player will take notes, but a good GM will allow them to remember. Would probably be the sub rule here. Maybe that's one I'm going to write down.
Because I think that would be the way to put it. I think here's one of my philosophies on GMing, is that there is a base level expectation. Like, I expect players to be mature, reasonable people first. And then there's, the game. It is a game. There's elements of that. Anything that helps facilitate the game, though, on top of that is extra. And it's one of the things I never liked about, say, 3.5 D&D, how a lot of things would come with bonuses, but they'd also come with penalties. I've never really liked the idea of your character being penalized for something. I'd rather that people get rewarded for something cool or special or above the ordinary. So if a player is writing down names, I think they totally deserve kudos for that, because that is a little above and beyond. And it does make the game better, but it's not... It shouldn't be expected, right? So I think it's the kind of extra thing that should be rewarded myself, rather than saying, any sort of penalty to the otherwise. Like, oh, you didn't write it down. I guess you don't remember that guy.
Yeah, and then that's...
But we're talking about my own father.
Yeah, you forgot your father.
You forgot your father's name. Look at you, son of the year.
Yeah. No, that's no good. So, okay, well, what about this? Magical reagents.
Wow.
Magic, like in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm sure in other games that have magic, there are magical reagent requirements for every spell almost, and they're stupid. They're dumb as hell.
Oh, like bat guano for fireball?
Yeah, a little bat guano, maybe a piece of like hyena fur, a little bit of brimstone, some salt, there's all sorts of goofy stuff all over the place, right? Who keeps track of it? I know I don't keep track of it.
I'm sure somebody out there who's got like their thumb up their ass keeps track of it.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure there's people that keep track of actual specific weight quantities that everyone's holding, carrying, or placing on carts too.
Does it enhance the game?
And see, I would argue no, it doesn't. And in fact, material components, unless... I find that the easiest way to sort of deal with material components, which is really cumbersome and silly, is you essentially purchase a components bag, and you just make it very well known that you have a little bit of all the components, maybe 2 or 3 castings of each, or more, depending on how you use it. Just like a whole bunch of stuff, right? And then it requires an upkeep. Like it's almost like a lifestyle, right? A magician's lifestyle with material components, and maybe they go bad or whatever, and just say it's like a gold per
it's
session.
part of what they're
something.
doing during their long rest or when they're walking around.
Yeah, they go figure out what the hell to do with that, and that's
Off screen.
Yeah, and that could also be part of the whole preparing a spell thing too.
No,
I
could,
don't know.
I could say that there is. It depends on what kind of game you're playing, like your setting and so on. Because if you're playing the kind of campaign that, for example, what if magic is super rare? All the players are magicians, but magic is very low level. It's super rare. It's secret. It's banned. These components are just little things that you smuggle through your day, and they're essential to casting a spell. And that's actually what the game focuses on. Is that then could actually be fun and enhance the game. But in your traditional like Dungeons and Dragons,
I want to sit around, drink a few beers, and play a game of Dungeons and Dragons with a bunch of buddies. Like
I don't think that's enhancing the game.
No.
Like,
so
there's just a certain amount of rule keeping that's.
But that sort of flies in the face of the taking things into account. But then again, not really. As long as you say you have like a section of material components that you spent a bunch of money on, and then you just every so often, you as a player maybe go tell the GM that you're going to put some money into it. Just so you understand that yes, you're not quite following the rules, but for the sake of convenience, let's just say we are,
I guess that's what it is.
And then obviously foci and expensive material components are a different story. Like I'm talking about the janky a piece of sulfur that's worth less than 1 monies, whatever your currency is, right?
Yeah. No, it's just
Some
insanely
dirt.
retentive.
Oh, some water. Oh, I sweat a little bit. That's water. Oh, yep. There you go. Material component. Like I guess that's an entire That in itself, though, is an entirely different way of attacking that problem, too. It's maybe they do need to keep track of it better. Maybe the game would actually be enhanced that way, because they'd have to start thinking of ways to produce the material components they need.
Yeah,
but a lot of those material components are really exact. So, yes. I don't know, or maybe they would just... A lot of their spells would just be no, I have 3 spells, and I have the components for 3 spells, and any fancy spells I gotta
Well, I can't say it wouldn't for sure, because I've thought about how the game would be better if spellcasters actually had fewer spells but could cast them more often.
That's 4th edition, almost. That was a terrible system.
It truly is. But then again, everything kind of blended together in 4th.
Yeah, I don't know. The way that we've naturally done it is people tend to just ignore the material component requirements of spells, and they just go and do whatever the hell they want because they just want that instant gratification. They don't want to take that off. Yeah. And honestly, I don't even think Wizards of the Coast, maybe TSR in second. I'd have to look at it again, but I don't even think Wizards of the Coast took that into account. They don't take the material components cost into account. It's part of the balancing of the spell, maybe, but I don't think... I think when they're talking about what each class can do, they don't even care about the fact that it requires verbal, somatic, and material components.
I think at best, the more in-depth play groups might say, I spent an hour in this cave looking for material components. Alright, make a survival check, or an arcana check. Alright, done. Yeah. Personally, though, I'm looking at this and ways, because we're saying, keep account, keep track of things, but also some things just aren't worth keeping track of. So what we're really talking about then is the expectations between DM and players.
Yeah.
I think that's something then that people gotta sit down and say, hey, listen, these are the things that I expect you to keep track of. These are things that you really shouldn't bother. Maybe in my campaigns, we're always going into towns often, and there's a lot of action, so don't keep track of your ammo.
Yeah, so some GMs don't keep track of gold. I know in Shadowrun, they use a lifestyle system.
Oh, even D20 Modern had
wealth. I think Storyteller, World of Darkness junk, all of that crap, that uses lifestyle as well. Which is you have a certain amount of liquid assets to purchase anything you want. You don't have to keep track of the money. It's just anything under, if you have Lifestyle 1, anything under $10 you can buy. and if you make a purchase of like $1,000, that kills your lifestyle. Like that your lifestyle will go down by 1. And then as it goes up, it gets like more and more ridiculous. It's like, you know, $1, $10, $100, $1,000, and like a lifestyle 5, it's like $10,000. Anything under $10,000 is joke money.
Yeah.
And if you have to spend like, was it like $1 million, your lifestyle might go down, or something like that. But that's a way for GMs to sort of put limitations on, say, cash, on spending money. It's like, you don't have to keep track of your gold. I'm not going to tell you how much gold you got from fighting the monster. You know, if you get a lifestyle increase, I'll tell you.
Let's see. There was a system I played once that did ammunition and that sort of thing. It was an ammunition actually had a dice size, and when you rolled under a 4, it went down by 1 size.
Yeah.
It's just weird to be like, whenever somebody asks how much money do I have, how many arrows.
Well, you were saying, yeah, your biggest pet peeve was the fact that people don't keep track of their ammunition.
Oh, just because they never end up in that cool situation where they're out.
Here's the other one, another good one. Dungeons and Dragons, spell durations.
Mm-hmm. I keep track of mine.
Yeah, well, it's good
every time, even if we spend a round talking.
I find most of them are like 10 minutes long. The ones that I like to use, or they're instantaneous.
Mine
but
usually lasts
some of
a
them
minute.
don't last. Some of them last like 10 turns, maybe 1 minute. Who keeps track? Like I guess some people do, but it often battles only last like 5 rounds.
Yeah, it's true.
Like I haven't fought a lot of battles that go deep, unless we're talking about like epic encounters and they go real deep. Like it's, you know, you're keeping track of everything, and yeah, I know CASTE, just to shill. CASTE doesn't. You don't have to keep track of how long like the durations of effects are anymore.
Yeah.
Because I gave everything a breakdown chance. Like status effects have a number attached to them, and if they break down when you roll doubles on your base dice, and they break down by that amount, so the potency of a thing is basically how much breakdown it can endure before it falls apart.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, it was a nice way to just be like, oh, and it's nice because
you still get that random effect,
yeah, there's a random element,
like
like
keep track of
your buffs and your debuffs and stuff can just sometimes fall off. Like it's just sometimes the magic didn't stick as nice, or sometimes it stuck real well, and that guy just never seems to want to roll doubles. You know, it's like there's an intensity to every roll, but that's I'm going off topic. But like it's another way to avoid having a lot of weird bookkeeping on a character.
I think it's kind of like the reason why it's so difficult to do things like weapon or armor durability. It's that at the end of the day, if somebody is rolling something, it better be for a reason.
Yeah,
It should be impactful to the game whenever they do something, especially if it means writing it down. Like, I keep track of my encumbrance, but I don't keep track of it every time I add an item to my inventory. I just periodically update it.
Yeah. Yeah, usually I usually just keep a cart with my characters, like a rickshaw or something, maybe a donkey attached to it, and just be like, it all goes on the cart. And if it gets ridiculous, like I'm carrying a couch and like a fridge and like 3 guys and a painting, you know, okay, maybe the rickshaw can't carry that.
For me, I just like knowing where my items and gear are, because I love those special moments, like when we were fighting that Iron Golem in Swampy's game, and it's like, oh, geez, it's, you know, all this toxic gas is coming out of its vents, and I'm like, that bag of ball bearings I had kept with me the whole time. Haha, I got them handy. Well, I've got the wagon that so much of my stuff is in, right?
But you see, that's the point of being proactive, right? Like now you are able to look at your character sheet, go, I would carry this, or I do carry this. Go, here, and I'll use this. Now, if the player was being reactive, you could be like, can we say that I had some ball bearings? The GM would be like, no. Or like, can we say that I got my Scarabane magic item that makes me immune to golems?
Well,
you know,
for example,
no.
you had said everything goes on the cart, so I would say no for that case. Just
oh yeah, well that's I do put everything on the cart. I do keep track of sort of what I'm carrying with me.
Yeah.
Like I have a backpack, but I don't carry all my stuff on the backpack. And there's been some times when in Swampy's game that I've just been like, well, that would have helped. Yeah. Guess I'm just gonna swing with my big stick, right? So, but that's me keeping track of like being proactive, and I just chose in being proactive. I'm just not going to carry a lot.
I know I find as a player, there's keeping track of things. You never know what's going to come up, and when you do actually have something, you can say, it's right there. You know, it's handy, and I mean, you remember it too. I mean, the whole point of a character sheet is that it is like a reminder pad for yourself, because the character isn't supposed to exist on the paper. It's supposed to exist as you play them, right? Mm-hmm. This is just a reminder. But also as a DM, I really enjoy when players are prepared and they know what spells they have. You know, if somebody shows up and they haven't picked their spells, or they haven't updated their spells in several levels.
Yeah,
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Is that your pet peeve?
It's not my pet peeve. My pet peeve, because I've had to do it so many times, is people who don't know how to play the game. Like, they haven't even looked at the book. And to be a big misogynist, it's usually female players, because all their boyfriends and or other people are trying to get them to play, and they just they don't care as much about playing the game. They just want to sort of hang out with people, and they don't read the book, and over the course of 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, they still haven't read the books. They don't know anything about what they're doing, and and you're just basically, they're holding up the whole game. It's not just female players. It's just, they stick in my craw, because it's usually when someone's like, can my girlfriend play? I go, ugh. Because I know exactly what's going to happen. There are male players, lots of male players that do exactly the same thing. And they're just like, I just want to play a game. I can't be bothered to learn any rules.
You know what? I think I know what it is too, because I would be fine with a lot of these people if they were saying, yes, I'm going to play a barbarian, or I'm going to play a fighter, and I'm going to be a champion or something like that. But no, every time they're like, well, can I be a sorcerer, ranger, druid? They want to be something weird.
Always, yeah.
Always.
The trope I have in CASTE is you want to be a dragon. Because it's always a dragon. Can I be a dragon?
I would love to be a dragon. Yeah,
that'd be great. You can do it in CASTE. It's easy. It's not that hard. But it's a pain in the ass for me as a person who has to write your character for you, because you don't know anything about the system, which is expected because you've never played before.
And then you got to overwhelm them with all their options.
Well, yeah, and they've picked something that has literally every option, including optional options in the game. And you're just like, and this is all the shit that you have. And they're like, okay, I don't use any of it because I don't understand it. And you get this kind of stuff all the time. Usually with people who are like edgy boys who want to do something like ridiculous. Can I be like the Nightmare King of Super Dragonland?
I want to be an 80s metal album.
Yeah, actually, I've had a guy play an 80s metal album.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
I think that should be a fair thing. That, you know what, flat out, if somebody doesn't know how to play and they want to get into it, they got to do something simple.
Well, I find once again, like when I play a game, I just take a look. Like I've never read like the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition book from cover to cover, but like when stuff comes up, it's like, I want to play a barbarian.
What's barbarian do?
Flip a few pages. Go. There's about 4 pages of what a barbarian does. Oh, I don't understand this word they're using. Flip, 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 flip. Oh, now I see. I don't even buy the Wizards books because they're trash and I don't want to spend $70, $80 Canadian. Oh, doxed.
I got mine online for like $40.
Yeah, they went up in price quite a bit. Nice. Yeah, but I'm not going to pay that much money for a book that's going to be defunct in like 4 years anyway. Like,
I don't know. I think they did pretty well with this one, partially because they did things like, hey, you can have a magical foci rather than a component pouch. They got rid of that mechanic entirely if you want.
Is that what that magical foci shit is all about? Like, I haven't read that.
Yeah, that's what it's about. Even carrying capacity is an optional rule now.
Well, good. That's that's just a fact of life. That's just Wizards realizing that nobody actually used that, and they were wasting
gave in to their players. They surrendered.
Yeah, but like the foci being a... How does that work?
It's a replacement for a spell component pouch. The downside being is that you have to have it in your hand, right?
Oh, okay. So like instead of having a shield and a sword and casting spells or whatever, you actually have to pull the material.
Yeah, because you can always have an empty
out.
hand to use your component pouch, or you keep your foci in your hand. And for things like paladins, they can put their holy symbol right on their shield.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So it definitely encourages some things, which is good. But
I'll have to look into that. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with the component pouch. So I guess 5th edition addressed that by saying, oh, you can have some symbol or whatever. Oh, okay.
I can have a wand? Yep.
Sounds good. Great. Then their head's not completely up their butts. Okay. Let's see here. We talked about the memories and what people should or should not do with respect to that. Talk about material components, ammo. People should probably keep track of ammo. Sometimes that shit runs out. Material components, we talked about. Even keeping track of money. Reactive GMs. Okay. This is a good good thing. Like how reactive should a GM... that's a really stupid question. Let me think. When reacting to players, how much should they just go with the flow? Oh, that's a really bad way of putting it. How much should the GM just do the most the word is eluding me. Wow, good radio. The most common option, like how often should they use the most common option? How often should they do interesting? Like that sounds like a stupid question that answers itself. How often should they breach what people expect? For example, when we talked about the goblin, how often should there just be a random key in their boot? How often should there just be like this, that, or the other thing? Like how often should the goblin have extra treasure? A good example of this is rolling random treasure tables. How often should we be rolling random treasure tables? Should the GM be placing magical items? This is a good question that come from this. Should the GM be placing magical items themselves in the dungeon, or should they be rolling random magical treasure?
Ooh. I do both.
Or should they just be thinking about, should they be like, oh yeah, dual-wielding sword or two-handed sword-wielding guy, there just happens to be a large two-handed sword with a slightly greater enchantment than what you had before, just sitting in the dungeon. Which is something that some people do sometimes.
Those things exist, and it's supposed to... I find that the random treasure tables alone don't necessarily favor your players enough, that they'll wind up with a lot of magic items that nobody uses. It's great that you got this +2 maul that absolutely nobody will use. You don't want too much junk, especially... I don't feel like magic items should really get relegated to being junk in someone's inventory. I mean, that's one of the things. It's magic. It's supposed to be this great thing from ages past, or this, infusion of arcane power, or deity-blessed, hammer of kick-assery. It should, have some impact. And to say, well, because you've got this really rare magic item and it's awesome and nobody's willing to give up their character build for it, it ends up a little bit on the
Oh, that brings us to another interesting question. Character builds. Should these even be a thing? You get your cool magical mace, and sorry, you've spent the last 6 levels building towards great swords. The magical mace is worthless.
I think it's a bit of a bummer. So I kind of go by the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, where, roughly speaking, about 80% of the time, if people hear hoof prints, hoofbeats, they're horses, not zebras. But that 1 in 5, yeah, it's going to be, an elephant or something weird. Where that way players still feel rewarded for having routine expectations of things. They're not going to be like, oh, frick, there was a creak outside on the other side of the door. It's going to be a vampire. Because that way when a vampire actually shows up, it's unexpected. It's out there. It's like, oh, geez, that's...
That's just you?
Yeah, it's just, actually unexpected without it being like...
So roll a d6, basically.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose that'd be
pretty
one
close.
way to do it.
If they rolled a 1, rolled a 6.
Roll a 9 or a 10 on a d10. Whatever.
CASTE just uses d6s, so I'm like, roll a d6. That works.
There you go. Roll a d6, and if it's like a...
If it comes up to 1, the goofy thing might happen. 80-20, actually, that's a pretty good way of doing things, because a lot of things in nature turn out to be 80-20.
Well, it's good pacing for stories and music, so...
Yeah.
I figured it would...
Yeah, that's actually probably a good rule to live by in terms of how much you should usurp the expectations of your players and add goofy extra stuff. 80-20. Roll a die, maybe, and then maybe I've never really liked random magical item tables because they're very exact.
Yeah.
I built, I think on the CASTE page you can actually get the Chaos Engine, which is like it's a super randomizer I built.
Nice.
In university, I built like a quest maker, which was like 3 pages long. It was a D&D quest maker. It was like a huge hit. Everybody loved it. And then I made a Shadowrun one, where you could randomize runs, like shadow runs, and it would randomize like who your Johnson is, who are you working for, what kind of an enemy are you fighting, where is this enemy, what are his guards like, what's the tech like, you know, and then at the end it would tally it all up and it would give you the value of the run. So it's like, oh yeah, you know, you're looking for, you know, this run, where you're fighting a dragon, you know, tally run, you know, 10 million Nuyen. Nice. And people are like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I used it a couple times. But then I built this thing called the Chaos Engine, which took it to like a step further, which was like, it had random NPC generation, random villain generation, random dungeon generation. So it's like every room of the dungeon, you're just like, it's a large room and it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, you know. And like random township, like the quest generator would like randomize how the town felt about the villain. And so like it was just a whole bunch of weird random tables that you could literally go, oh, my players are coming in 20 minutes. You just roll a bunch of dice, you write this stuff down, and then you just sort of use your imagination to connect the dots, and it creates a whole. And in this diatribe that I talked about, the point I was getting to is I don't like how exact random generators usually are. And in the Chaos Engine, what I did was do things very vaguely. And so the idea was, like, when you're rolling a villain, and the magic items does the same thing, but the villain is a good example. You would roll a villain, and it would be like you're fighting against the villain. You would roll a totem for the villain. Whether the GM takes this totem as a fact or as a sort of like just a metaphor for the persona of the villain, that's up to them based on what they roll. But it's like you get the totem. So it's like I rolled gorilla, and then it's like the gorilla, you know, is evil and this, and what are his motivations? Okay, he wants to flood the town. It's like, okay, so now we have this guy represented by the gorilla wanting to flood the town, and he's like evil as hell. And, you know, what's stopping him from having done this already? It's like, oh, it turns out there's a mafia. And so, okay, now you've got this guy represented by a gorilla. Okay, well, if he's fighting against a mafia, maybe he's in a rival mafia. Okay, let's say he's a merfolk now, but his nickname is the Gorilla, or like the Sea Gorilla. Like it's a joke a riff off of the joke Sea Monkey, right? So like he's the Sea Gorilla, right? And like you see, like just putting out those 3 random things, you bind them together and you turned it into something that's like it always works. And that was one of the things about the random quest generator back in the day. It always seemed to work.
It's inspiration based. You got a fortune cookie kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that with the magic item generator, it was very similar in that it was like, what kind of magic? Necromancy. Okay, how powerful a magic? This kind of magic. And like, you know, and then you just be like, what kind of an item is it? It's a weapon. You know.
Okay, yeah.
And like, how valuable is the weapon? It's a very valuable weapon. So it's like, okay, well, if it's a very valuable weapon, it's probably something rare. So it's going to be like a Suglin or some bullshit. Something ridiculous that nobody uses. And whatever. Or it's like a mundane weapon. But like, when it comes to random generation, I like the idea of vagueness. Is really what I'm saying, and that's the example I'm trying to use.
Well,
and shilling, obviously, by now.
But I like that too, actually, because again, I was talking about shoehorning versus railroading. That works even better because instead of like, if you have something vague, it can be inspiration. You can come up with that idea. You can say, all right, if I change this idea, like maybe, for example, in this campaign, I don't have merfolk, but I do have werewolves being heard in the outskirts of town. So what if the gorilla is a big, brute werewolf? You know, he's a little on the slow side, big, dumb lumberjack. But you know what? He's been outcast by the town. He wants to get his revenge by flooding them with wolves. Then all of a sudden, hey, that could be something shoehorned in there, right? And so actually, I really like that inspiration-based rather than literal item list. That I think, honestly, it sounds way more functional. I'm gonna definitely check with the Shadow one too, by the way, because I do run Shadowrun every second Saturday.
I don't think the Shadowrun is around anymore. But I'm just checking to see right now if the Chaos. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Oh, there it is, right there.
Okay. Well, now that I know where it is, maybe I'll repair, because it's like on a weird broken link. I'll repair the cast page, like the skunk works on the cast page, and then I'll provide a link in the description for the skunk work or for the Chaos Engine. It's older. It used V1, but it doesn't. It's setting. It's not setting specific, except for when it talks about how powerful a thing is, like in the points. And like that's, yeah. Points are just like every
Levels.
5 points is a level, basically. If you wanted to use level based. Yeah, great. That's sweet. It's there. It's there and it's accessible. I'll link it in the description along with the other things. Alright then. What do you think? Is there anything else we should cover now that I'm sort of thinking about this? I think we covered sort of players, pro action, kind of, don't necessarily have to be real, like, ridiculous about it, but, you should mark that you have a sword, and if there's anything that's, like, obviously, when it's necessary, like, when the time is necessary, like, when the time is right, and you want that one MacGuffin that will save you, you better have it on your character sheet, right? Because you can't always assume that you have the right tool at the right time. Like, you should be writing these things down. Especially when it comes to various items. Like magical items, or this, that, and the other thing. Or potions and things like that. Like, you don't always have a magic potion on you, the right tool at the right time. You don't have a bat utility belt.
Don't just keep track of the stuff that's good for you.
And like I said, GMs don't have to do that. Like, they should take into account things that are complex, and they should probably plan ahead of time to make it seem like everything is seamless. But just use a little bit of random chance and think about what would probably be there, and allow your players sometimes to riff off you. Like, you can riff off each other. That seems to be the word of the day, is riffing. But yeah, like, just... if the player asks if something's there and you never thought to put it in there, but there's a pretty good chance that it should be there, why not? Is there rope nearby? You're in a dock. Yeah, you never thought that there was... you didn't write on your sheet that there's a rope, but there's a pretty good chance that it'd be there. Yeah, there's a rope right there. Yeah, it's like a... and then you might subvert their hopes by saying, yeah, it's like large hemp rope for boats.
It's rotted terribly.
Or yeah, you're in a rotted dungeon. It's a rotted rope. It might not last for anything really awesome, but it might be good for you. But that's where the mending spell comes in, or something goofy like that. Like, you start throwing like hurdles, little tiny hurdles when they just find what they want. Sometimes is good too. Sometimes don't even do that. Just say, yeah, there's some ropes, exactly what you're looking for. Lucky you.
Well, and sometimes, for lack of better terms, sometimes people suggest something that's just flat out stupid. And
is there a chandelier in the forest?
And sometimes go along with it, because I've done that before, and it makes everybody can get a good laugh in. It's an entertaining thing, and it's okay if once in a while stupid things happen, because that's real life.
Sometimes stupid shit does happen. It's true. That's a fact. Yeah. With that said, I guess I'll just do some brief closing comments. I sort of said my piece already. So why don't we just let Mr. Dagwood here say his piece on the rule? What do you think?
I think it's a bit sad that you look for contention in this case because I fully agree with you on this rule. It makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, with that said, like we were saying last week, like and subscribe, share this, buy the merch, support me on Patreon. None of these things are available, but whatever. Yeah, I hope everybody goes out and has themselves a great night.
Right on.